Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Founder Spotlights. My name is Andy Saldana, and I'm the Executive Director of New York Tech Alliance. And with us today, we have Wen-Kuni Ceant, the CEO and co-founder of Politicking. We have a fantastic conversation ready for you this afternoon. But before we begin, I just have a few quick announcements and thank yous before we dive into the conversation. So first up, just a quick privacy statement. We are recording this event, so if you don't want your image captured or shared, please be sure to turn off your video camera. We do encourage you to participate in the conversation and ask your questions. We do encourage you to put your camera on when you're asking your questions, but it's not necessary. So please do what you would like in that situation. A little bit about New York Tech Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization here in New York City, driving access, equity, and inclusion within the New York tech ecosystem with the goal of making it the most diverse and dynamic in the world. If you'd like to connect with us and learn more about us, please check us out at nytech.org or connect with Doug, who's on the call today, or myself. We're always happy to have a conversation about the New York Tech Alliance, the tech ecosystem, anything related to tech. I'm always excited to have those conversations. A few quick thank yous to our wonderful partners that make all the work that we do possible. Everybody from Crown Castle to EY, Eisner Amper, all fantastic service providers within the community looking to support the tech ecosystem. If you're interested in connecting with them, please let us know. And then a very special shout out to Grasshopper Bank, who makes this particular series possible. They're a fantastic bank here in New York City, a digital bank focused on the innovation economy. So I encourage you to check them out, especially if you're an early stage founder. They have such amazing resources to support early stage founders. And then our next events. On Thursday, February the 25th, we will be doing a special panel conversation for founders, entrepreneurs that is focused on IP, patents, and copyrights. We encourage you to check it out. It's being led by our wonderful Paul Ellis, who leads a lot of our panel discussions. It's a great panel discussion that we have set for you. And then on Tuesday, March 9th, will be our next edition of the New York Tech Meetup, where we showcase amazing new technologies to the audience. It's always a fantastic place to see new tech that's being developed. In fact, Wen-Kuni was a participant in that event in November. And then if you're interested in past conversations, I encourage you to check out the archive. You can find it at this URL, nytech.info/founder spotlights. And with that, we're going to start the conversation. I think I have everybody in, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Wen-Kuni. Wen-Kuni, would you please introduce yourself? I'm so happy to have you joining us today.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Andy. Doug, thank you for having me as well. And thank you to New York Tech Alliance. I'm super excited to be here. As Andy mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Politicking. Politicking is a social political mobile platform. Really started as an app, but grew quite quickly past that into a social media platform and just a forum for people to be able to become educated and informed about politics on a state, local, and federal level. We're particularly focused on millennials and particularly focused on millennials that have been historically disengaged or disenfranchised from the political conversation. So that includes Black and Brown people, that includes first-time voters, people from immigrant communities, the LGBTQ plus community, anybody who has been historically excluded from the political conversation. Politicking really reaches its hand out to those groups in an effort to ensure that we're all included and we understand the importance of political capital in this country.
Awesome, fantastic. And, again, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today and as part of this conversation. Just to set the stage and then take care of a little housekeeping as well. Again, we encourage audience participation. So if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the chat. We'll be checking that, and then I'll ask you to ask those questions yourself. And then Wen-Kuni, just to set the stage for the conversation, we're going to dive deep into how you started politicking as a business and as an app, your journey to this point, and kind of what your next features and goals are. And then we always try to keep the conversation lighthearted and positive. We appreciate everybody who's taking the hour to be with us today and to share their time. And especially during a time such as this, where there's so many distractions and so much pressure coming from all different directions, we do like to take this hour, just connect, enjoy each other's company, and just have a fantastic conversation. So again, thank you so much. A little bit more background. Wen-Kuni demoed the Politicking app at our November New York Tech Meetup. So I encourage everybody to check out the video from that event. It was a really fantastic demo. So I won't ask you to demo that again, but maybe we can start with a little bit about your journey into creating the app itself, and kind of what was the reason that you started it? How did you come to be? I know from looking at your background, you are a Fulbright Scholar. You have a master's in public health. So I'd love to hear how that has influenced that journey as well.
Sure, Andy. Thank you again. So I can't have the conversation without thanking my co-founder, Jordan Wilson. And really, the app was born out of a conversation that we had in 2016. Really, I was lamenting on the fact that I had went to cast my ballot. I went to do early voting like a responsible citizen. And I realized that I didn't know much about who was on the ballot. I knew a little bit about who was at the top of the ballot, but I knew little to nothing about who was at the bottom of the ballot, Andy. And, that really stuck with me because I realized the people on the bottom of the ballot were the people that were actually mitigating policy in my backyard. So these are my mayors, these are superintendents, city councilmen and women. These are the people that really, if there's something wrong in my community, I should be able to pick up the phone and call. And I didn't know who they were. I didn't know their names. I didn't recognize them. And, after having that conversation with Jordan, I realized, it's not a me problem. It's a we problem. A lot of people don't actually know that information. And quite often, people are really embarrassed about it. Political illiteracy is a thing. People don't know who they should be voting for, how often they can even vote, what a mayor does, what an alderman does, what a superintendent does. And quite oftentimes, Andy, people get embarrassed by that. And it really turns them away from voting. And we want to eradicate that behavior, right? Because we know it's not healthy. We want them to find out information in a safe space where they feel comfortable. And we also want them to actualize that political capital by voting. Obviously, voting's not the only way to actualize your political capital, but we think it's one of the first and foremost ways that you can get involved. And it's your civic duty at the end of the day. And so, after Jordan and I had this conversation, we were really started to look for resources that informed folks' voting behaviors. Like, okay, if I were to say, Andy, what do you do before you go vote? Some people would say, I read the paper, I looked on Google, I went on Yahoo, whatever the case may be. But we realized there wasn't a central aggregation of that type of data that you could really easily, even while you're online, look through your phone and say, okay, these are my candidates. Okay, these are their campaign policies and backgrounds. This is where they're from. This is who they get funding from, stuff like that. These are things that are really important to inform your decision. And so since we realized it didn't exist, we decided to create it. We wanted to be the change that we wanted to see in communities. And especially as two young Black women founders, that was extremely important because we knew that the rates of voting within our community specifically was historically low. And my family actually is from Haiti. And so as I spoke with members of my community that may have various language barriers, etc., there were so many issues that started coming to the light. And so this is something that, Black and brown people are suffering from in disproportionate ways, but not only Black and brown people, but millennials at large. We are not the baby boomer generation, and we're not voting like the baby boomer generation. And one thing I could say about our parents' generation is they do turn out to vote. They do turn out to vote. And that's why a lot of their wishes are actualized, whereas ours are not. We are the Twitter generation. We will get online and complain, but we won't necessarily take the steps that we need to fix the problem. And so that's kind of why Politicking was founded. And just to give a little bit more information about the tie to the public health background and Fulbright. And so 2016, I just finished my MPH at Drexel University. So I got a master's in public health and health management and policy specifically. And I had some really incredible professors that really helped me to understand that public health and government truly aligned and went together hand in hand. This was when, you know, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, was still really, really big and really popular and novel. And so people wanted to know more about it and about what that would mean for their health and their family's health. And I decided to go study health systems in Senegal for a year. And a lot of people were like, well, that's different. That's a step kind of off of the beaten path. And it was, but what it reminded me and what it showed me, Andy, was that, you know, the issues that we have here in the United States are actually not too different than the health issues that other countries are battling with. And it showed me that no matter where you go, medicine, public health, and government are inextricably bound. You know, you can't find one without the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And you answered my question. That the next question that I was going to ask is like that experience of looking at systems in an international setting and how that is influencing how you're creating something that's specific to the U.S. Are you thinking about, you know, what are the similarities? And you spoke to that briefly, but are there any more learnings that you gained from that experience that have influenced the creation of the app?
Yeah, a ton. So I went there really with the notion. So I before I went over there, I had kind of studied the Kaiser Permanente system, and Bernard Tyson, rest his soul, was the CEO of Kaiser Permanente at the time. Brilliant, you know, Black CEO, and he really had done some really innovative things in California with Kaiser Permanente and beyond. But there was someone else in his organization that actually started studying healthcare co-ops in Uganda, and how healthcare co-ops in Uganda might work in the United States, how healthcare co-ops might work. And so I saw an opportunity to kind of create something similar in Senegal, and really provide families with the opportunity to insure themselves. Now, one thing that I have to point out, Andy, is that health insurance is not really a thing in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's not that the healthcare doesn't exist, but fee-for-service healthcare is what exists. What that means is that you go to your doctor and they ask you for $20 and you pay your $20 and then you can get seen. And that's not really what we see here in the United States too often. And so what I realized was that if they were focusing on fee-for-service healthcare, then what happens when something unprecedented happens? What happens when there's cancer or malaria? And that usually would eradicate a family's entire financial structure, totally decimate it, wipe it out. And it was just really sad to see. And so what I worked on while I was out there and was able to kind of tie what I learned in the United States and elsewhere, was really trying to come up with a health system that worked for them, that allowed them to do prepayment. So basically be on an insurance type system, but do it for their entire family. And the other thing I learned, Andy, was that their families look a little different from our families. It wasn't the nuclear family, you know, two dogs and two kids and a dog, white picket fence we were used to. These were Muslim families that might have several wives, that may have several children, that may live on a compound instead of a home. And, you know, people's parents live with them and grandparents. And so I learned so much about family dynamics, political dynamics. And oftentimes I would knock at the door and people didn't want to tell me how many people lived in the home. And I understood that was because there was some government, you know, things that have happened in the past that they had negative experiences with that. And so that's why it's so important to understand the intersection between government and public health. And that, again, is what inspired me when I came back, like, hey, I want to do something about this here at home, because there are people that are suffering from health disparities here in the United States. And I think our job is to hold the elected officials accountable to ensure that they're actively working on the issues that matter to us.
Absolutely. And that thank you so much for going in depth into that background and story, and really important information there, hitting on the intersections of the political system and the healthcare system. You know, we haven't even touched base on the education system or the other social and economic systems that are impacted by politics at large, and how, you know, it's such a big topic that you're looking to address and navigate, and helping. The goal, from my understanding, the goal of the app is really helping to demystify a lot of that, what exists and goes into creating the democratic society that we live in,
That's
and
right.
it's a big thing that you're looking to achieve for specifically populations that often feel disenfranchised, or not included, or don't feel, either due to education or socioeconomics or culture or background, they just don't feel like this is the place for them, right? Politics is not something for them. I hear that a lot from some of my family. And you know, I'm fifth generation American, so it's not like we're new to this country, but we hear the same sentiments, um, every time we have these conversations. So I'm curious to, you know, when you were starting politicking, outlining kind of what the app was going to include, what was the MVP that you went to market with, and how did you start to tactically address such a large issue, and put out a product that would be begin to be useful?
Yeah, Andy, you're right. I mean, it's a big thing to try to get your arms around. I'm still every day trying to grapple with that, as is Jordan. But realistically, when we first started creating our MVP, some very ugly wireframing took place. But after that, we realized that the most important thing was that people just did not have like that name face identification. And so that's why we are our most important feature on the app, and I encourage everyone that's in here to download the app. I'm sure Andy will provide the information, but it's Politicking. And the electorate feature really allowed people to put in their address, and you can automatically see who's representing you. And it starts all the way up from the president, and it goes all the way down to the mayor, superintendent, city councilman that represents you. So we thought that was really, really important to start, because my number one thing is that I tell people you can't hold someone accountable if you don't know their name. And that's really, really foundationally important. It's like, before we even start grappling with these issues, let's just talk about, do you know who your mayor is? You know, can you say their name? And a lot of people get a little uncomfortable when we have those conversations, and that discomfort is okay, because we have to move through that to get to the root of the issues. And I know, most people pay attention to presidential elections because, right, our news flood is inundated with those images. But unfortunately, we don't give as much credence to our local politicians. And we knew that that was important. So with the electorate, like I said, you put in your address and you can see these candidates on a local level. You can see circuit court judges. That is super important. You can see the sheriff. People, when the instances of police brutality that have happened in the last several years started really coming to the forefront of the media, I went to Howard University, and a lot of my friends were absolutely outraged by it, as was I. And they were like, let's take it to the streets. I'm like, cool. Do you know who the sheriff is in that county? No, I don't. Okay, do you think that might be a good place to start? Do you know who the district attorney is in that county? Who's the attorney general of that state? And they started to realize that these are the things that we have to know. We have to arm ourselves with that information before we can take it to the streets sometimes.
Right.
Because we can yell as loud as we want to, but if we don't know who we're yelling at, it's not going to permeate. So that's just some of the things that like real life practical applications that politicking had and has had in the last several years, and why we chose to really focus on having people to understand that. We also have like glossaries, because like I said,
Mhm.
people might not know stuff, and that's okay. We want people to be comfortable with asking questions, saying what they don't know. We try, even on our social media, we try to keep it as rudimentary as possible. because we know a lot of people don't know, especially a lot of people that look like me, and that's okay. But I want to make sure that I'm speaking to them in a language that they can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say that your social media presence is phenomenal and really fantastic in just the ongoing education. I can see really how you're leveraging it to build this community around the brand and the product. I'm sure it's been super important in how you're growing exposure for the app and then just the business itself.
Absolutely. Social media is like probably one of the most important things. Like right after the app, I think it's social media for us because it allows us to keep the pulse of what's going on. I mean, I have to shout out our social media strategist. Her name is Ariani. She is absolutely phenomenal, and our Twitter has been booming lately because of her. Also because we live in a really crazy place, but the way that she's able to format the tweets and really get us on the forefront, on the precipice of what's going on in politics, she amazes me every day. I love my team. I really wouldn't, I'm just a figurehead at this point. You know, that I work with some really amazing people that keep me grounded and that lift politicking up. And that's the only reason like why we're even able to have these types of conversations today.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned a few key people on your team, your co-founder, your social media strategist. How big is your team?
So we have 7 to 10 people on the team. I would say 7 to 10 because it oscillates between who's full-time, who's part-time. We have some really incredible board members. We have some really incredible interns. The youngest member of my team is 17 years old. Shout out to Christian. He's in high school. He's an absolute whiz kid. Last thing he did, DL Hughley retweeted it. I'm just like in awe of my team constantly. But it's, you know, it's a varying age group of varying, you know, racial demographics, and you know, it's such a beautiful thing. I can't wait until we're out of the pandemic and, you know, hopefully can get to the next space where we can have an office space so I can get all these beautiful minds in the room. But it truly is amazing what you can do with technology and a little bit of elbow grease and passion. And I think that that's what I see, you know, from Politicking's team day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to pause real briefly, see if we have any questions from the audience. I encourage anybody to put them into the chat, and then we can ask you to ask them on camera. But while we're seeing if there's any questions from the audience, one of the questions I have is, you know, as an early stage founder, one of the biggest challenges that you have is trying to decide who's your first hire, how do you grow that team? What are the most important aspects of the business that you can start to offload from you as the founders into more everyday positions? So can you talk us through a little bit about what that process was like in the early days and kind of how that's continuing to change, especially during remote work?
Yeah, no, the first hire that we had to make was really a coder, to be honest with you, because Jordan and I are both non-technical founders. So what that means is that we don't code, but we wireframed it. We had the idea, and then we had to bring it to someone who was able to code it and really help us get our ideas down on paper. And so our first hire absolutely was a gentleman by the name of Penny. He's our coder. He's awesome. And he's continued to stay on with us till this day. So for us, that was the most important thing. But I think what we didn't realize, because at the very beginning, Andy, you know, our social media presence wasn't as dominant as it is now. And so once we realized the impact of that, it was social media strategists, really getting people that understand the nuances of Twitter, of Instagram, of Facebook, and really putting them to the forefront so that they could help politicking to grow. Everybody's one tweet away from a viral moment, you know, one post away from a viral moment. And so with politicking, you know, we're constantly trying to achieve that to make sure that people are kept abreast of these types of issues. And it's so interesting, just the way that we're able to do that. I saw a tweet on our Twitter the other day and it was saying, you know, Joe Biden's expected to give the State of the Union address later this month, etc. And for the first time, behind him will be two women, and I was like, wow, I was like, that is such an interesting way of looking at it. That
Right.
you know, obviously Nancy Pelosi has been there for a while, but wow, we have a woman vice president. Like, let that sink in as well. So these are the types of, you know, nuances and ways that, you know, we're able to put out information in a way that's unique to the mainstream media. Because everybody's reporting on this stuff. I think the challenge is finding a way to do it in a unique fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I have to say, I'm a Gen Xer and social media still frightens me a little bit. I know how to use it. I understand it, but it still I'm not a native social media person. And so as you know, I've taken over the brand of New York Tech Alliance. I've built a couple of other businesses and working with a couple of other organizations. I've started to think about that as part one of the strategy, to go to market strategy as well. It's like, how are we going to leverage social media and the channels that we have at our disposal to get the brand out into the market? So I love the way that you talked about that and the way that you described getting those experts on your team as early as possible to help you get the voice of the brand and just kind of the continuity of the brand created. So thank you so much for that insight. We have a question from the audience from Michael. Michael, did you want to jump on camera and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, hi, thanks for having me today. So I downloaded the app and I'm pretty sure it was free, unless I paid for it by mistake. But what is the strategy for monetizing the app? I noticed that there is a GoFundMe application, but anything other than that?
Yeah, no, Michael, great question. And thanks for downloading the app first and foremost. So there's a couple of ways that we're able to generate revenue through politicking. So the first way is, first of all, politicking is nonpartisan. And so we don't endorse candidates, but we do allow candidates a platform to run their advertisements. So for example, if you are located in Chicago, you'd be able to see the political advertisements that are being run in Chicago. So candidates are actually able to come to us and pay for them. And we're very clear in the distinction, like, this is a paid advertisement, you know, politicking is not endorsing this. And so just last year, $10 billion were spent in political advertising. This year at Politicking, we're calling it the year of the mayoral election because we're focusing on Boston and New York City and Atlanta. And these are huge metropoles with the propensity to spend a lot of money on political advertising. So that's the first way, Michael. The second way is through general advertisements catering towards our target demographics. And then the third way, which is actually the newest method of revenue monetization, is through ballot guides and accountability guides. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So prior to November, we started getting reached out to by organizations like the Brooklyn Nets, like the NAACP, like the Urban League. And they were like, hey, we have these big organizations and we want to provide our employees or our population demographic with an opportunity to learn more about the things you guys are talking about. But we don't want to just do it on the app. We actually want something created specifically for the demographic in which we're serving. And so we were able to do those things. And then on the tail end, some of the things that we're working on now includes accountability guides, because as we both know, the first 100 days are quickly coming. And everybody wants to know, how did Biden and Harris do after the first 100 days? And so we do that obviously not only for the presidential and vice presidential candidate or president and vice president elect, I should say, but also for local, governors, senators, congressmen and women. We want to know how they're doing. How's your mayor doing? Did they fix the pothole that they said they were going to fix when they were running for office? So we do accountability guides on a mass scale to allow people to really keep their thumb on the pulse of the elected officials they voted and really to find out how they're doing. Because we always like to promote the fact that politics don't end in November. They begin in November. And then it's up to you to make sure that you're holding them accountable for as long as their term is. And so through the ballot guides and the accountability guides, that's been really our newest monetization strategy.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, those are all really fantastic ways. Thank you so much for that question, Michael. Awesome. I think we have another question from Doug, actually. Doug, did you want to ask your question, or do you want me to ask it for you?
No, sure. So I was just curious about your process to obtain feedback about the platform, and what's most important to you at this point in time to improve it.
Yeah, Doug. So thanks for that question. I look at feedback as a gift. Anybody who has questions, concerns about the app, info@politickingapp.com. It's on our website. And there's a couple forms on our website that you're able to fill out as well if you have feedback for us. And that goes directly to us. And I do read them. I do email people back because I think it's important. And in terms of the second part of your question, what's the most important thing that we fix? I think it really is the app itself. Sometimes the app can be a little clunky in certain areas, or the UI UX experience can be improved. And I want to know that. I want to know why it's not working for you, or how it's not working for you, or how it can serve you better. Because really at Politicking, it's our job to make the political process more streamlined and easier. And people are already going through a process that, I think that could be changed, significantly. And so we don't want the app to be another sticky point for them in terms of something that prevents them from voting in an educated and informed manner. We're trying to stop you from having to Google 30 people. If we can have the information assembled for you, that's our duty. And so feedback is a gift, all feedback, but particularly towards the app, the things that are working and not working, UI, UX, that's user experience, user interface for everyone who's not a techie. We want to hear that. We want to know what's working for you and what's not, and how we can be better.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug, for that question. Wen-Kuni, picking up on that conversation about UX UI, and you mentioned that you and your co-founder are not technical co-founders. So, and this is a big app with a lot of data inputs to kind of aggregate for different municipalities, different states, different, the federal, when we're talking about federal democracy versus the municipal democracy versus, the state democracy, they're all different levels of the system. And how do you, I guess there's multiple questions here. The first question is, how did you navigate not being a technical co-founder and, figuring out the pathway to creating a very complicated app? And then two, kind of how do you use all that data and serve it up to the specific locations?
Andy, it was an uphill battle, and it's one that I'm still in the midst of. What I will say is that I learned a lot. I don't consider myself a non-technical founder because that's not where I started off as, but I know a lot more than I knew at the onset. I'll say that, if something's broken, I can pretty much troubleshoot it and go in and fix it at this point. And then, what really helped me, and I would say Jordan as well, is we attended accelerators and incubators. We did Emerge 1867, which was a great one. We did Conscious Venture Labs in Baltimore, which was an awesome one. And they taught us a lot about the tech side of things and how to manage the information. And then my coder, he is very patient with me. So we have a lot of questions and a lot of conversations about how does this civic API work? How does that work? Talking to other civic tech entrepreneurs. It's been a constant learning experience. I'm trying to constantly educate myself. I'm learning technology jargon always, which is why I'm so careful to always make sure I say what I'm talking about, because I remember when I didn't know what UI UX meant,
right.
So it's important for me to talk to people who may not know what those things mean, because I was there once too. And so I consider myself still a novice or amateur, but I could do a little something. But I'm happy that I have the team behind me to continue to learn me and the things that I'm not as strong on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Are there any specific resources that you found truly helpful in navigating this world of tech and kind of moving into that direction of being more educated around technical issues?
I would say, like, aside from the accelerators I attended, there were some pretty awesome conferences that I also attended. Sometimes I would attend, weekly or bi-weekly, like coder boot camps, stuff like that. Just short, but enough to get me information about what I needed to kind of learn to take my skills to the next level. And so it's really been kind of an uphill challenge, and but yeah, constantly trying to iterate and learn more skills. It's not more so about certifications, but it's like, okay, if we need to add a new feature to the app, now I'm trying to learn everything I can about this particular feature. And so that's kind of what our learning process is like. But yeah, it's definitely challenging, but I encourage people to learn more about it. I mean, tech is such an interesting field. It's ever changing, which is probably the most stressful thing about it. I'm like, oh God, Google came up with a new thing they want us to do. Now Apple's acting crazy. So it is a lot to manage. But you're constantly learning about the requirements and you get better and better every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And just as soon as you learn one aspect of what you're building, the API changes and you're like, oh no, my app's not going to work in a week, right? How do I make
Oh
it
yeah,
so that it's continuing?
I mean, one time it went down because we didn't upload our privacy policy that I didn't even know we had. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it. It's like, so constantly keeping your foot on the pedal.
Yes, constantly. Well, that's really great insight and feedback for the audience as well. So speaking to the amounts of data that you aggregate, like, can you talk a little bit about how you're able to serve up such specific information? I know that there's the general layer that's consistent across the platform, but then there's the hyperlocal layer as well. So how do you kind of accommodate that?
Yeah, so it was a lot of data scraping. I think so. The first step kind of is each user creates a voter ID card where they put in, their name, their biographic information,
Mhm.
essentially. And it's really important to get that from them because every person in the United States, believe it or not, has a voter ID number. The problem, Andy, is nobody knows their voter ID number. So like I don't know my voter ID number off the top of my head. I know how to get it at this point. But so we realized we can't ask people for their voter ID number, although it would make it very easy. So we had to source a lot of things by address. And the civic APIs, which are like the automated programming interfaces, basically allow us to pinpoint it based on your zip code and say, okay, their zip code is 33025. That means they're in a Miramar, Hollywood area. So we're able to pull out all of that information for them about who's in their area. And then there's data scraping on the back end too, because the thing about politicking is that this information's out there, right? You can find out the names of these elected officials and their
Right.
platforms and their backgrounds. But have you ever been to your Board of Elections website? It's not very sexy, and it quite often it's depressing. I mean, I click right out every time.
It's so
So
much
now
information. You're like,
it's so much, and it's not presented in a way that's exciting. It's
right.
very dry, and can you imagine doing that for hundreds of counties, thousands of counties? To be honest with you, it's boring. It's not attractive, and everybody's Board of Election website looks different. And so having to data scrape that, I mean, it's really an arduous experience. I mean, it really does get you down sometimes. But we, like I said, we have such a wonderful team, and we found ways to kind of go around it and pull out the information we need. But everything is based basically on your address, your voter address, and we're even able to tell you where your polling precinct is. And so that's really, really exciting for us to be able to give that sort of information.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I've been playing around with the app regularly since you demoed in November, and I really enjoy the usability and the UX UI experience. It's very nice. So great
Thank you.
job on that. I think we're going to move the conversation towards a little bit of funding. Again, back to revenue and funding. We don't really concentrate on that part in the New York Tech Meetup, so I'm excited to talk a little bit about that here. Anne, I see that you have a question. Did you want to jump on camera and ask it?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So I really love this concept, by the way. This is exactly something that I will be using. I downloaded the app, and instead of asking all my friends that live in the neighborhood, like, hey, tell me about our local candidates, I can actually now refer to this app. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
But I just wanted to know, so I saw that you have a GoFundMe running right now. And what are your plans for outside funding? Like, are you planning on doing a seed round? And what kind of milestones do you hope to achieve before you decide to do that?
Yeah, no, is it Anne?
And yeah.
And thank you. Thanks for downloading the app. Wonderful question. Yes. So first of all, Anne, if you could drop the GoFundMe link too, so everyone can have that. But secondly, and yes, we are in the midst. We kind of are in the midst of our family and friends round, actually. So trying to close that up. But we definitely are always interested in attracting investors. Investors not only with financial capital, but also, the influence to kind of get us into rooms that we may not be able to get ourselves into. And that's something that Jordan and I talk about quite often, is that we don't just want money. We want people who really believe in politicking and politicking's vision. And we always think about like why we're taking on money. Like, we're not just taking on money to take on money. We're taking on money to grow this thing fast. Because we always say it doesn't matter how great politicking is, if not everyone in America knows about it, then we're limiting ourselves and we're limiting our growth. And this is a resource that I want everyone to have. And the reason why it's free, to kind of piggyback off Michael's previous question, is because we want to promote that equity. We don't want there to be a further barrier of entry for getting this type of information. And so it's really, really important that we are continuing to fundraise. We do plan on starting our seed round a little bit later in the year, around November time. And so we're really hoping to do a big raise. We're looking towards about $1.2 million to try to really make sure we ramp this up, because like we were talking about with Andy, having this sort of information accessible from every single county in the United States, it's a big task to get your arms around. But after we see that, I think there's really no limit to what politicking can do. Everybody should have access to this information because they deserve it, and they deserve to be able to cast an educated and informed ballot.
Great. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for that fantastic question. And Wen-Kuni, we had the National Science Foundation speak at the New York Tech Meetup last night about
I saw that, yeah.
America's Seed Fund. And I don't know if you've thought about applying for anything in that category of funding, but I think that this is definitely a game changer for society. So I would, not just you, but anybody in the audience, if you're looking for non-equity type funding, the government does have some programs in place, and encourage you to check it out.
I'd love to talk with you about that a little more offline, Andy, and like get that information from you. So yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, we're approaching the end of our conversation, and before we end, I still have one or two more questions, but one of the questions that I have is about what is your ask for the community, right? Like you've mentioned the fundraiser, you've mentioned adoption. Are there any other particular asks that you have for the New York Tech Alliance community as a whole, and how can we get you to your next milestone?
Thanks for asking, Andy. There's a couple asks. So the first thing is, like I always say, please download the app. Like one of the audience members said previously, feedback is a gift. So if you see something wrong with it or something's broken, let us know so we can fix it. I can't say how much we value that. We know we're not perfect. We're a young organization, but we're committed to getting the work done. And so that's super important to us as well. Donating to the GoFundMe is always a game changer for us. But following us on social media, there's so many ways to support politicking. Follow us on social media, attend one of our IG live conversations, this past Monday, we had a young brother on that's running for the mayor of Albany. Amazing conversation. He was previously incarcerated. There's just so much nuance that I think politicking adds to the political conversation. And so letting your friends know about it, I always say, like, you know, when you hear about things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, nobody advertised you to get on Facebook. Your friend told you to get on Facebook. And so we ask the same thing. If you like politicking and you like what we do, tell your friends about it. You know, you don't want to be the only one that knows what you're doing when you go to vote. So don't be selfish with the information, pass it along. If you guys know investors that might be interested in partnering with us, let us know. Opportunities like this, you know, Andy, thank you for thinking of us. We love to be able to reach out to communities that we're not necessarily connected to. And, you know, I consider a New York Tech Alliance a friend of ours and have been since last year when we initially spoke. But we love to do things like this, and we love to get people in a room and really dialogue with them about politics and politicking. And so, you know, continue to pour into us, whichever way is best for you, and we'll continue to pour out into the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, you know, it's a pretty time full of anxiety and so many different things that exist in everybody's world. We're all, you know, I've been having this conversation recently about how for the first time in history, like every single person on this planet is going through trauma, right? And I just taking a moment to think about what that means. And so everybody is moving through the world in a way unique to them, but with this overlaying of communal trauma that's happening, and just how crazy that is, you know, like it's a phenomenon that we hope to never see again.
Yeah.
But, you know, in those moments, I always look at my friends that are struggling, or my coworkers that are struggling, or, you know, anybody in the community that's really struggling at this moment, and ask them to focus on the good things that have happened to them recently, good things that are coming up in their life, and really think about what that is. And so I want to move the conversation towards that to end the session, and just ask you, like, what is something that's been really great that has happened within this last week or this last month?
That's a good one. Wow. Something great that happened. So, I mean, I can say, if I could speak a little bit to last month, I mean, you know, we saw some crazy things happen in January, but some of them were crazy beautiful. And I'm wearing our inaugural t-shirt. We're nonpartisan, but we did do a commemorative t-shirt. And for me, as a Howard woman, seeing a fellow Howard woman inaugurated to the second highest position in the United States, it was really an emotional moment. It was really an emotional moment as a Black woman, as someone who has attended my alma mater. I mean, it really felt attainable, and that was such a beautiful thing. And, you know, I think we felt similar sentiments with the election of Barack Obama, but I think this one was a little different. It hit a little differently for me, at least. And I know a lot of my friends, because the HBCU experience, that the historically Black colleges and university experience, is so unique. And oftentimes people say that the HBCU experience has been rendered obsolete in this day and age. It's not necessary anymore. And I think Vice President Harris is
Yes.
such a testament to the importance of having these sacred spaces for Black and Brown students to be able to learn and fellowship and build each other. And then we can go out into the world and really start changing it. And I think that, you know, if you listen to her interviews, she always pays homage to Howard. And that's literally how I am. I mean, some of my friends are on this now, a couple of my Howard sisters too, I see, but like, it's just such a big part of who we are. And it's something that I was thankful I was able to see. I'm sure it's something I'll be able to tell my kids about one day, is that, wow, like the first, you know, Black and Asian woman graduated from my alma mater, and was inaugurated into the White House. And that's just something incredible. So I think that is something that has really been carrying me forward into the year. I'm like, wow, every day I ask myself, what's your excuse? What's your excuse? And I don't have any. I don't have any anymore. And I think that's largely because of what we saw January 20th.
No, that's a beautiful answer. And I have to say as well, that moment of her getting sworn in hit me in a way that I had not thought about or reflected on. And I still think about that. And again, it does help to motivate you and get you through whatever challenge it is that you're facing. And then the last question, so thank you for the answer. It was very, very amazing. The last question I have for you is, what are you doing for yourself in the next day or week or month to preserve this strength and sanity to help you, preserve yourself in this time?
Funny story, Andy. I'm going to say what I'm doing for self is I'm getting the second COVID vaccine. And I wanted to say that because I know it's very controversial right now, especially amongst my demographic. And I've had many arguments with friends, family, loved ones about it. But it's the most important thing I can do I consider getting the vaccine self-care because it allows me to start moving back towards my normal life, which involves a lot of travel. I was very miserable in 2020 because I did not travel internationally, with the exception of once, which was home to Haiti. And I really did not like sitting idle for a year. So, with the new guidelines being passed by the CDC and having to test negative before coming back in the country, it was either get the vaccine or cancel my international trips. And I chose love. I chose self-love. And so I'll be getting the second Pfizer vaccine early March. I encourage everyone to do the same. But, aside from that, I try to rest and relax. I have some amazing people in my community that keep me charged. So I'm very thankful for them. And a lot of them are on this call. So thanks, guys, for coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really, truly enjoyed the conversation today and everything that you shared. I hope that everyone on the call enjoyed it as well. I'm going to quickly share my screen and make sure that you have, actually, I don't think it's going to work. So I will just make sure that I type in both of our email addresses into the chat if you want to connect with either Wen-Kuni or myself. I've been having problems with Zoom lately. It doesn't like the screen share functionality for some reason. So anyhow, but we do hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Wen-Kuni, it was such a pleasure to have you back with New York Tech Alliance and communicating. I look forward to staying connected and hearing all of the success that you're finding. Please feel free to reach out. And this goes for anybody in the room. Please feel free to reach out. We're always here to help make those connections, connect you to the resources that we have available. And we hope that everybody's entrepreneurial journey is a success. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy, for having me. Take care, guys.